Hello, welcome to Chapter 3 of the Business of Finance course. Here we're going to be looking at organisational and business structures. So as always, the chapter will be split up into kind of bite-sized chunks, just so you're not sat there listening to me drone on for an hour or so at a time. Let's get straight on with the chapter. And as always, the first thing we're going to think about is a bit of a definition. So what is organisational structure? This chapter is fairly interesting, lots of things that you might find quite familiar. It's really good to to think about what we're looking in a theoretical sense and then try to link that to what you guys see in your own organisation at work. So what is an organisational structure? Definition we've got here, it's the grouping of people into departments or sections, which shows the allocation of responsibility and authority, and it sets out how various functions are formally arranged. Okay, so think to your organisational structure at work. You'll be able to see what teams are managed by whom and who's in which team and who reports to whom and so on. So let's think, let's think about what the point of that is. Well, why do we have an organisational structure? Well, I mean, even before we look at the notes here, let's think about what that enables you to do at work. Well, firstly, it shows you where you fit. So it shows you what other employees you're linked with, where you fit in the organisation, who you report into, and so on. It shows how your groups work together. So your team might be related to another team. Shows you what you're responsible for. It shows you what authority you have to perform tasks. So, these bullet points here, fairly straightforward. So all those things we've just covered. So it links people together and shows you where you fit, allocates your certain tasks, gives you an idea of what your authority is, coordinates you between other teams, and shows the flow of information and work through the business. So fairly straightforward stuff. Now, there's been a number of theories around organisational structure that we're going to have a look at. And the first one that we're going to have a look at is by Mintzberg. Okay, so Mintzberg came up with his organigram, and he said that all businesses can be analysed into 6 building blocks, so 6 chunks that show us how a business is comprised. Now, Mintzberg didn't suggest that all of the building blocks in all businesses were the same size, but what he said was that all businesses will have these. Now, some businesses, for example, might find that they have a big support staff function, so that would be a bigger section or maybe a bigger operating core. So all of the businesses will have these blocks, not necessarily in these proportions. So let's run through the different areas that Mintzberg outlined. So first of all, we've got the operating core. So operating core is going to be your shop floor. So this is where all of your inputs become outputs. Okay, so this might be, for example, your factory workers, so people who are directly involved in producing a unit. Next up, we've got our middle line. These are going to be your supervisors. So these are going to be the people that link the very top management with your operating core. So they're all about ensuring your operating core are controlled, but also communicating the message from the top line. So speaking of top management, here we've got our strategic apex, and this is where the strategic direction of the business is set. Remember, in chapter 1 we looked at mission statements, and these will be the people that are responsible for ensuring that the business is following that mission. Also, then we've got support staff. So support staff are going to be exactly that, staff that support the rest of the organization. So that might be your cafeteria staff or perhaps your security team. And then finally, you've got this strange term over the left here, technostructure. So technostructure is all about standardization. So whenever you see standardization in reference to Mintzberg, that's what we're talking about. So it's all where our analysts and our planners sit. So this might be, for example, your finance team, so standardizing behavior. Now, I know what you're thinking. Up here it says 6 building blocks, and I've just outlined 5. Well, what we need to bear in mind is overriding all of this is the organization's ideology. Okay, so the ideology sits on the top there, and it oversees everything. So it's the values, the beliefs, and the traditions of our culture. So think back to what we saw with business culture earlier in the course. This is where we see overall those values of the business. So that's going to permeate everything. Now, in terms of exam question, what could we potentially see? Well, they might ask you, for example, which of the following form part of Mintzberg's 6 building blocks, and then they'll give you, a couple, maybe strategic apex and middle line, and then they'll give you a few that are made up or from other fit theories, or they could give you a description of somebody's role and ask you where they fit, and you'd have to say, well, that sounds like they're part of the strategic apex, or they're part of the operating core. So certainly examinable. So I would make sure that I'm happy with this before I move on to other areas. Over the page there, we've just got a description of those 6 building blocks. So take some time, have a look over those, but essentially they're just showing us what we've just annotated on our diagram there. I guess one thing that we should really point out there is you can easily draw the traditional hierarchy system over the top of Mintzberg's work. So still really thinking about that classic hierarchy structure. That leads us nicely on to Fail. So Fail stated that there were 14 guiding principles of this idea of a hierarchy. So if you're going to have that hierarchical structure, there are 14 guiding principles that we should follow to ensure that we're operating both effectively and efficiently. So let's run through those 14 guiding structures and think about what it means for us as a business. So what did this classical theory say? So first of all, how should we divide work up? Well, there should be lots and lots of specialization. So everybody should be able to do one job and do it very well. So think to a traditional construction line, or a car manufacturing line, where you have one person who perhaps does some wiring, one person puts the wheels on, and so on. Everyone has a job, and because they do it over and over, they become really good at it. If we think we're going to have a look at modern ideas in 1.4, but just think for a second, if you had a factory where you had to make several products, maybe that specialization is no longer perfect. You might need people that are multi-trained. Okay, what else did the classical way say? Well, there should be a very clear vertical chain of command. Okay, so nice tall hierarchy. People at the top make the decisions, people at the bottom carry out those orders. Okay, so a nice strict vertical chain of command. What about authority and responsibility? So people who are in charge should have enough authority to carry out the responsibilities assigned to them. Well, that makes sense. If you're going to tell somebody to do something, you need to have the authority to do so. Appropriate centralization. So again, linking back to that hierarchy, decisions made at the top where appropriate. So classical theory would say the most decisions should really be made at the top there somewhere. Unity of command. Okay, so unity of command just means you have one person telling you what to do, so one boss only. And again, if you think to some sort of project system, that might not necessarily fit into that plan, but again, we're sticking very traditional here. Okay, unity of direction, so making sure there's only one plan for each activity, so one objective and that one head. Okay, so a body shouldn't have more than one head. What else did we have for the classical theory? Thinking about initiative. So employees should be encouraged to use their discretion within the bounds of their authority. So some sort of initiative, but within certain boundaries. So there's still a lot of control there. Subordination of individual interests. Essentially, this just means you should essentially put your own interest to the side, and the general interest of the organisation should prevail. Okay, so all the focus is on the organisational objectives. Discipline-wise, a fair disciplinary system can be a strength, so that makes sense. There should be some sort of disciplinary system in place. Order, so people and resources should reliably be where they're supposed to be, so there shouldn't be lots of flexibility. There should be some sort of order there. Continuity of employment is important. So there shouldn't be a constant turnover of employment. That kind of rules out the idea of lots of flexible workers, so lots of freelancers, for example. You should really have a core workforce that carries on as long as possible. Organizational policies should be just, so that makes sense. Remuneration should be fair, so satisfying both employer and employee alike. Now, I think we can all agree that that's a great idea, but how practical that is, I guess, would depend on where you work. Finally then, esprit de corps, just thinking about harmony and teamwork. Okay, so making sure that there's contentment there, but also, again, reiterating that idea of discipline. So making sure that there is a discipline undertone there. So that's the traditional hierarchy structure. 1.4 moves us on a bit to thinking about, well, what kind of modern approaches are there? I guess we need to consider why we need modern approaches, and as I said, I guess that the perfect example is you need your business to be really flexible. So thinking about being able to change manufacturing processes quickly, being able to react to demand, being able to react to different opportunities. So that's really where these modern approaches come from. And that's why you'd really focus on multi-skilling. So we're moving away from that idea of specialization, that division of work, and saying, well, what's wrong with one person being able to do several jobs? Not only does it enable the organization to move them around where needed, also provides lots of motivation for the employee. And yeah, absolutely, that focus on flexibility. So what do we mean by flexibility? What does that actually tell us? So smaller temporary structures. So lots of projects. If you need a task completed, we'll bring in a team that knows how to do that task. And when the task is complete, we can disband the team. So lots of flexible working. As I said, multifunctional units. So this idea of a matrix organization basically means that we have multiple layers of command. Okay, so one person here might report into two different line managers, or one project manager and one line manager. So this idea of unity of command, where one person tells you what to do, is kind of replaced. Finally then, flexible deployment of the labor resource. So what's wrong with having a few part-time staff, having a few temporary staff to come in, do a job and then go away? Okay, so this idea of having continuity can perhaps be overstated when we think about a modern business. So there's a couple of different approaches, both classical and modern. And then finally, for this section, we're going to look at how the organizational structure is communicated. The first way there, organizational chart, would be the most common. So think about how you know what the structure of your business is, and most likely it's going to be through that organizational chart. And let's have a think about what this might look like. So I've got an example here of a school organizational chart. So you can see right at the top there, you've got your board of trustees. This is obviously an American school, district superintendent, admin assistant, and then it works all the way down through the different departments. And it just gives everyone a good idea of where they fit. So what's good, what's bad about this? Well, let's have a look at some advantages and disadvantages. Advantages: need to analyze organizational detail. So we can very quickly see, lines of authority, who reports into who, and so on. Provides at a glance information, so I don't need to go away and read lots of information to see what I'm trying to look for. I can see very quickly on my chart, yes, this person is who I need to talk to, or this person is responsible for that. And also highlights formal relationships. And obviously we've specified their formal relationships. It doesn't really show me the actual relationships of the business, it shows me what they should be. And I guess that's going to be one of our disadvantages. So disadvantages: obviously every time somebody leaves we need to update it. So you might find, in fact, a task for you go into work tomorrow, find your organisational chart and see if there's anybody on there who's already left. It might be interesting to see how updated yours is. As I said, informal relationships not shown. So just because you're supposed to report into somebody doesn't necessarily you don't have a strong relationship with somebody elsewhere. May imply managers at the same level are equally important when that's not the case. May encourage bureaucracy, so not really focusing on the right areas in terms of our business. Second option then for communicating that structure would be an organisation manual, so a bit less common perhaps. I'm sure you've all seen an organisation chart, and in fact when we come on to look at job description, I'm sure you've all seen one of those. What is included then in an organisational manual? Well, this time we've got a bit more detail, in fact a lot more detail. So there'll be information about all the different positions, so not just a visual guide, but a bit more detail, and then also outlining standard principles and working practices. So think about your employee handbook. That will outline lots of principles that your employer adopts. Finally then, job description. So this basically telling you what the job entails, so what's going to be included, certainly something like your job title, what department you fall in, what grade that is if it's the kind of industry that has a pay grade, and what your duties and responsibilities are, the limits to your authority, and then where you fit, so who are your superiors and who are your subordinates. Again, just trying to communicate where your role fits within the overall organisation. So that's organisational structures as a bit of an intro. Next recording then we'll look at the different types of organisational structure.